You wake up, the sun is up, but it's completely wrong. It gives no warmth, no shadow at noon, and the color is off. Not gold, not yellow, but a strange, faint blue, like the moon in the middle of the day. You don't know what year it is. Nobody around you does, exactly. But scientists today can name it down to the month. March 536 AD. You just woke up on the first morning of what Harvard historians now officially call the worst year in human history. And you have no idea it's about to last 18 months. If you survived this year, you'd watch the sun stay blue. You'd watch crops die on 3 continents. You'd watch snowfall in August. You'd watch a plague come through what was left of the human population and kill 1 in 5 people on Earth. If you survived this year, you'd understand why every fairy tale about the sun going out comes from the same buried memory. Why your brain still panics when the sky turns the wrong color. Why long winter is a horror concept in every culture on Earth. Not because we're imaginative, because it actually happened and your body still remembers. The dimming started somewhere in Europe, Rome, Constantinople, the Byzantine world. In March of 536, someone in the streets of Constantinople looked up and thought there was an eclipse. There wasn't. The Byzantine historian Procopius was awake that morning, and he wrote it down. He said the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon during the whole year, and it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse. The Roman statesman Cassiodorus wrote that the sun had turned a bluish color, a blue sun without heat. Now imagine you're a farmer in 536. You don't have a phone. You don't have a ChatGPT to ask. You don't have a word for atmospheric particulate matter. You have crops in the ground, a family to feed, and the sun above you just went wrong, and nobody knows why. You get anxious when the weather forecast is uncertain, or you complain when the shower takes 30 seconds to warm up. They watch the sky go blue and stay that way. They had one summer that didn't come, one autumn that never arrived, one winter that lasted a year and a half. You've never had a season that didn't show up. They had a year where none of them did. Everything you know about how the world works all broke in 536 for 18 months. And this is the part where I have to tell you what broke the sky. 12,000 kilometers away on the other side of the planet, a volcano had erupted. The exact location is still being argued. Probably Iceland, possibly somewhere in North America. What's not argued is the scale. It was one of the biggest volcanic eruptions of the last 2,000 years, and it pumped so much sulfate ash into the upper atmosphere that it circled the entire globe. The ash didn't fall. It stayed up there, suspended, and it reflected sunlight back into space. The Earth stopped receiving heat. So people did what people do when the sky breaks. They prayed to a sky that was full of poison from a volcano they'd never heard of. The gods weren't listening because the sun wasn't broken. And no one in 536 had the science to understand that. They only knew 2 things. The sun was blue. Nothing would grow. Then summer came, or it should have. Instead, in June of 536, snow fell in the deserts of Mesopotamia. Cassiodorus wrote about that summer too. He called it a winter without storms, a spring without mildness, and a summer without heat. He's not being poetic. He's describing a year where the seasons stopped happening. The wheat didn't ripen, the rice failed, the barley never came up, cattle froze in the field, the birds stopped migrating because the temperature signals they'd used for 100,000 years were suddenly wrong. Ice cores from Greenland show what happened next. Tree rings from Ireland to California show it too. The summer of 536 was one of the coldest summers in the northern hemisphere in the last 2,500 years. And it wasn't just cold, it was quiet, because the animals that made noise were dying, and the humans who fed on them started dying next. You may get frustrated when your food delivery is late, but in 536, people started dying of hunger by the thousands, then the tens of thousands, then the millions. The crop failure hit Europe first, then the Middle East, then across Asia. Same year, same reason. But nobody could connect the dots because nobody had maps that covered all 3. To the people alive at the time, it just looked like the entire world was ending. The tax records from the surviving empires tell the story. Byzantium, the Persian Sassanids, the Gupta Empire in India, grain shortages, villages abandoned, entire regions depopulated, records of parents doing terrible things to keep their children alive, records of children doing terrible things to survive their parents dying. The Byzantines had a phrase for what they were seeing, a wound in the world. And they weren't being dramatic. It was pretty much accurate. Sometimes we have a bad week. They had a bad year, then another half. You panic when the fridge is empty and it's not payday yet. They watched everyone they loved starve in front of the same fire. Some of them lived, some of them didn't. The ones who lived kept eating whatever they could find for 18 months. And then finally, slowly, painfully, the sky started to clear. Around October of 537, the blue faded. The sun came back, pale but yellow again. The temperature crept up. The survivors who had made it through the first 18 months started to plant. For a few years, it looked like they'd made it, like the worst was over, like whatever curse had come would finally leave. It did not, because the volcano that started this had a friend. In 540, 4 years after the first eruption, a second massive volcano went off. The sky darkened again, not as badly this time, but enough. Enough to knock the temperatures back down, enough to kill the fragile harvests, enough to keep the empires bleeding. And in 547, 7 years after that, a third eruption, 3 volcanic winters, back to back to back. The 530s and 540s felt like an ice age again. An entire generation of humans grew up thinking this was normal, that the sun was supposed to be weak, that summers were supposed to be cold, that food shortages were just how the world worked. They didn't know they were living through an unrepeatable stretch of history. They just knew they were hungry. But the volcanoes weren't the worst part. In the summer of 541, in the Egyptian port city of Pelusium, a rat carrying a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. It's the same bacterium that would kill half of Europe 800 years later in the Black Death. This was the first time it reached the Mediterranean. Historians call it the Plague of Justinian, named after the Byzantine emperor who was on the throne when it hit, which is the same emperor, by the way, who watched the sun go blue in 536 and never quite figured out what was happening to his empire. The plague hit a population that was already starving, already weakened, already burying a generation of dead children. It went through them like fire through dry grass. In Constantinople alone, at the peak of the outbreak, 5,000 people died every day, then 10,000. In some estimates, up to 16,000 a day. Cities ran out of graves. Then they ran out of grave diggers. They started throwing bodies into the towers of the city walls and sealing the towers up, which probably just made more problems. Modern estimates put the total dead from the Plague of Justinian at somewhere between 30 and 50 million people, which was, at the time, somewhere between 15 and 20% of every human being alive on Earth. The Roman world never recovered. Historians who study this period point to the evidence. Pollen shifts, port traffic drops, half-built monuments. And they say Europe didn't return to its pre-536 economic activity for 100 years. Some regions didn't recover for 200. The Dark Ages didn't start when Rome fell. The Dark Ages started when the sky went blue. Right now, there are 8.3 billion people on Earth. Imagine 1 in 5 of them dead in the same summer. Not from a war, not from a bomb, from the sun going out and never coming back the way it used to. You've never lived through a moment like that, but someone in your family tree did. Every single ancestor of yours who was alive in 536 lived through it. Every one of them survived long enough to have a child, which is how you're here. Every one of them stood in a street somewhere on this planet, looked up at a sun the color of the moon, and kept living. That's not luck. That's why you have the nervous system you have. Your brain has an ancient fear system called the amygdala. It doesn't remember specific events. It remembers patterns. And one of the deepest patterns baked into human survival is this one. The sky was wrong. The sun was out. And it was damn cold. The genes that made it to you were selected in part by the ones who knew when to be afraid of the wrong sky. That's why looking up and seeing a strange light makes your stomach drop before your mind catches up. That's why cold snaps in the wrong season feel like more than an inconvenience. That's why every mythology on Earth has a story of the sky that turned against them. And none of the storytellers ever met each other. They didn't invent that fear. They inherited it from people who watched the sun turn blue in 536 and didn't know if it would ever come back. So, look, you made it through this video. Congratulations. Your ancestors made it through years of no summer, a plague that killed 1 in 5 humans on the planet, and being buried in the walls of Constantinople. You made it through 10 minutes of me talking about it. Not the same thing. But here's the good news. The sky did come back. Ports in the Mediterranean reopened. The wine stopped tasting like vinegar. Some guy around the year 700 AD fired up a furnace for the first time in generations, melted down some silver, and thought, you know what? We're going to be okay. That guy was wrong for like another 400 years. But the point is, the vibes eventually improved. The bad news is, the same volcano systems that broke in 536 are still there. Iceland's still Iceland. El Salvador's still El Salvador. And every 1,000 years or so, one of them wakes up and remembers what it did. So next time you're having a real tough day, the AC in your Uber isn't cold enough, your phone battery hits 15%, the drive-thru forgot your fries, look up at the sky. Check the color. If it's still blue and normal, you're winning. If it's blue and wrong, run. Mookie posts weird history stories, weird questions, all in one. Subscribing would be a huge help. Bye.